What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Calling in Favors with your boy, the Angry Golfer. Right? We went on a little bit of a rant the last time. I had some things that I wanted to talk about that I kind of got off topic a little bit. It actually worked out because this past couple of weeks has been great. There's been a ton of conversation behind the scenes about equipment and bifurcation versus the rollback and how big the driver head should be on tour. I think it's got less of an effect on the tour player than it does on the average golfer like me and you. We're not learning small ball anymore because we go into these bays. We're in a controlled environment. We got TrackMan numbers. We're trying to hit the best shots we possibly can. And a lot of times, that's not golf. I've talked numerous times with plenty of people, and you're never going to hear me say that I'm a good ball striker. I never have been. I found a way to get it around the golf course. It took me, a few shots here and there to put up a good number. As long as I kept myself under control, hit it to where I was aiming, and wanted to keep it out of trouble, I was okay. I was only going to make bogey at the worst. I was never going to make a big number. It happens. So over time, you're going to hit some bad shots and things are going to happen. But I always looked at the golf course as a challenge backwards. I found the green. I found what I wanted to aim at. I found where I wanted to miss. And then I played from there. It didn't matter where the whole location was. I think modern golf, we've gotten to the point where greens are so big and so forgiving that they've kind of hidden the spots as to where you want to miss. And the golf course that I'm going to talk about today is the golf course that I grew up at. We're going to talk about two holes. It's the fourth and the fifth hole. When I was playing there on a regular basis, it was 1 and 2, and it was a great way to start. I'm not going to get into the politics of the club and the name change and the hole changes and all that. And it's clearly what happens when a non-golf mind is involved. You got to get the recreation model going. But I'm not going to go deep into that. We're going to talk golf and strategy and what I think is being lost on the amateur because we're being sold, hit it straight, hit it high and as far as you can. Well, some guys just can't do that. There's a conversation on Twitter yesterday, and the guy Cons from Barstool, guys were giving Riggs and those guys a hard time for playing Shinnecock. Well, they're in the golf entertainment space. It's not golf what they do. I love the Barstool Classic. I hated the Barstool Internet Invitational because it's not golf. I see some other guys chiming in on the YouTube golfers. I don't even know what the tour is going to be called, but Wesley Bryan and those guys are starting their own tour for them to compete. And I love that. I love being able to see what these guys shoot day in and day out and how they're playing, what equipment they're playing. Like I said, when I first got started with this podcast, that was what it was always supposed to be about. I had every intention of asking everybody that came on here, what's in the bag? What are you playing? How'd you end up on that one? Because we all have stuff that probably doesn't fit us perfectly, but it fills a need and takes care of an issue that we come into day in and day out on the golf course. You see guys switching equipment all the time. Tony Finau right now is trying a shorter or long short putter. It's not a broomstick, but it's not a regular length, and without being able to anchor it, he's kind of tinkering around. You hear the stories from back in the day when Freddie was at Mark O'Meara's house and found a 3-wood in his garage and put it in play, and it was Mark O'Meara's wife's 3-wood. We all have that one club. For me, back in the day when I was really playing a lot and coming up and starting to get better, it was a TaylorMade 5-wood. Those old orange burner heads, had a dynamic gold S300 shaft on it, and I hit it as far as most people hit 3-wood. Looking back on it, I understand now that it was because of how low spin I am. Now that we've gotten better, we've kind of figured out equipment, figured out the game. I've kind of installed things into my bag that fill needs and fill holes. It's not necessarily gapping issues as much as it is I struggle with this shot. I struggle with long irons. I always have, because I grew up at a club that was 2,700 yards, 9 holes, 5,400 if you look at it from 18 holes. And I didn't really have to hit those shots very often. Maybe a couple times around on the par threes if the wind was going the wrong way. But for the most part, the only time I hit anything longer than a 6 or a 7 iron was if I was laying up. And we're going to get into that as well. You've heard me talk about the driver being the straightest club in my bag. So laying up for me a lot of times is a mental mistake. If I'm standing on the first tee and there's a tight, narrow driving hole, I'm better off hitting driver as hard as I can down the left side with a little bit of fade. And we're going to get into that, and we're going to talk about why I play the way I do. And no, it's not my natural golf swing. I've had to fight that. My natural golf swing, anybody that played with me growing up, I had a huge forward press, a really strong grip, and I played a low hook. So I got used to playing things on the ground a lot. And then as the game evolved and as my game got better, you get to that level where you're just not getting any better. I was shooting good scores. I was hitting what I thought were good shots. And every day it's even par. Why can't I get under? Why can't I do this? And it was always one or two mistakes every round because I didn't know how to control playing the ball right to left. It wasn't until I got to college, and I've talked about this, right? The coach didn't really mess with me. He knew I had a self-made original swing. Like I said last episode, fun fact was I've never played a video game that's attached to the internet. Well, this episode's fun fact is I've never had a golf lesson, right? I figured things out on my own. But what he did for me was he kind of got me to see the golf course a different way and learn how to play a fade. And once I learned to hang on and play that fade, I was able to take the miss left out of play. So now I can aim it at the very furthest point left that I want. That's still going to be a successful shot if I flush it and hit that dreaded straight ball. But from there, I'm trying to work the ball back to the hole. A perfect example of that is I think it's 13-14 at Charles River. I was playing the Mass Open. 15 is the par 5 that you can reach in two. So there was a few groups on the tee, a couple of spectators around, and it's a long par 3. That's the one that you walk the bridge over the big ravine, and the pin was tucked on the front left corner. So obviously I'm not even looking at that flag. But when I'm standing on it, I'm setting up dead aim at that flag. I'm expecting it to fade and end up 15, 20 feet away from it. But I happened to tug it about 4 or 5 yards and hit a little baby fade. It hit the hill and ended up like 3 inches. And everybody's oohing and ahhing. And I'm sitting there chuckling, saying that might be the worst shot I hit all day. You're not trying to take that risk. But that's kind of what I want to make the point of, because of the equipment and how straight everything goes. We're all trying to play what we used to identify as the dreaded straight ball. So, but once you sit down and you start to develop your game and you start to think about things, how do I get from being 0 to +2, or from 5 to 0, or from 10 to 5? And usually it's small little details that have nothing to do with the way you're striking the golf ball. It has to do with what chances you took and where you made your bogeys or your doubles. There's a guy that caddies out on the Corn Ferry Tour. He's a teacher. He's kind of got a group of guys that play under his stable, and we've been talking back and forth. I had shut down the Instagram page completely until we started talking. And then once we started talking again, we started talking strategy, and he said something to me that resonated. Guys don't play defense anymore. You guys look at your round of golf within your match amongst your buddies, 2-on-2. What are they doing? What do I have to do to beat them? And that's not the case. Golf is you against the golf course, and every once in a while you have to play defense. So we're going to get into that a little bit. There's some stuff going on obviously with tour golf that I want to get to first. You see John Rahm kind of reached an agreement. There's a lot going on with Liv right now. I think at the end of the day, everybody coming back is a good thing, and the PGA Tour kind of needs to get out of their own way a little bit, swallow their pride. We're looking at this as two different golf leagues, whereas I think we're better off looking at it, outside the bubble and considering it like USFL. When the guys left for the USFL, Jim Kelly, I watched the 30 for 30 on it, Kelly to Marino. When he got drafted to Buffalo and he didn't want to play there, he went and played in the USFL. But when that folded, the NFL didn't punish those guys. They didn't suspend them. They didn't make them pay any fines, things like that. They let them come back in, and I would say it was more egregious for the football players leaving because they actually have a union. So they're truly abandoning their other guys in their union. So um, that's my opinion on the live thing. I think if it does dissolve and guys are looking to come back and play, let them come back and play. Speaking of one of those guys, Brooks Koepka, and we're going to get into some of the equipment stuff during this episode while I'm talking about my strategy and my golf. But Koepka's never been a full bag guy. You look at him, he was with Titleist forever, but he always had some different oddball clubs, whether it was the TaylorMade driver or fairway wood. And then he signed that deal with Srixon. And I think what's not being talked about enough is Srixon's distribution deal with Nike. I think that played a role in him signing with those guys. And it wouldn't surprise me if they wanted a presence on Live. I don't remember the timeline of it. Maybe I probably should have looked it up before we got to it. But he signed with those guys, right around that same time where he's going to play. And then they signed that Nike licensing deal for the apparel. I don't know what's going on at Nike with their apparel. It's about as bad as I've seen a turn from a company that was, pretty good. Tiger had some good stuff, some bad stuff, but for the most part, they had a lot of solids and a lot of athletic type fits. And now it's like they look like a, mishmash of stuff. That double logo thing, I get Seve and I get trying to celebrate Seve, but at the end of the day, that one doesn't look good, and two, he didn't even win. When he did that for the weekend, sewed those two Nike logos on his hat, he was in the lead, and he got chased down by Jack Nicklaus and ended up finishing it tied for third, I think. So it's not even like, 30 years ago today he was celebrating a win. No, 40 years ago now, but it's not even celebrating a win. It's just kind of an odd thing that he did at a time when Nike was just trying to get into the golf space. Tiger was the one that put Nike on the map. It's no secret that Seve wore it. Curtis Strange wore it to win the U.S. Open, back-to-back Opens in 88 and 89, 88 being up there at Brookline. But there weren't many golfers. Peter Jacobsen, I think he's from Oregon, so he kind of had that hometown tie. But yeah, for the most part, Nike never really had a presence in golf, and Tiger kind of gave him that, and once all those guys started coming up, Brooks and Rory, and Nike kind of became like they are in other sports. They signed a bunch of guys. They had the best of the best. They wouldn't let them wear any other logos, and they did their darndest. But golf is a tough nut to crack. They had a great set of blades. I've heard some good things about their drivers and hybrids. The golf ball was fine. They were the original. For those of you that don't know, it was kind of a big bone of contention around here. I live up in Fairhaven, Mass., the hometown of Titleist. And when Tiger left and he took some of that technology, there were some people at Titleist that were pissed. He took, their idea of the Pro V1, and he helped Nike develop that original tour accuracy, or I should say, Bridgestone developed that tour accuracy. But again, we'll get back into that conversation too when I start talking about the way I'm looking at holes and the way conditions and equipment come into play. Tiger has always played a spinnier golf ball than everybody else. It wasn't until recently that he made that switch to the Bridgestone Black. So, he was always trying to move the ball, trying to shape shots, playing the way that I'm going to explain to you the way I tried to play. And obviously, two different worlds. The margin of error is much bigger when I'm hitting the shot than Tiger, but you could see it. There was a I don't remember what year it was. It was probably 17 or 18 when he was starting to make his comeback, and you were like, is Tiger ever going to win a major again? But he was in contention at the British Open, and there were a couple spots on that final day where he kind of played away from trouble, and I think he hit, like I said, the dreaded straight ball, and he ended up with a 25 footer where he could have been a little bit more aggressive and kind of gone after to birdie. He ended up falling. I don't know. I want to say he was like 3 or 4 shots back by the time it ended. So, conversation I had with some guys recently, and that may be a whole new episode that we get into with Tiger, is could he win today with today's technology and the way those guys are playing for the dreaded straight ball by design and taking dead aim and missing in spots that you would never see Tiger miss. That's why he was in contention every week. He made the cut every week. And now we're playing with events that don't have cuts. So how important is that to people? You know, to me personally, I think his made cut streak, the 3-footers, something like 1,500 3-footers between 2000 and 2005, and he missed like 2. You know, that's the shit that Tiger did that made him so great. He was so consistent, but it was because he was a machine, you know, and we're going to talk about it. Days that he wasn't hitting it well, he hit it to a spot. And if he moved it and he missed, sometimes, like I just gave the example at Charles River, sometimes you miss at the flag, you know? So, yeah, those are just a couple things that I kind of wanted to talk about before we get into it. But now let's get into it, right? So we're going to talk about the 4th hole at Reservation Golf Club. And I picked the 4th hole because it gives you options and there's risk rewards and there's trouble that you can get into and there's numbers. I can see these things like the back of my hand. I don't need the yardage book. I don't need the GPS. I was actually going to try to put some pictures, and I might do it still with the yardage book, but the GPS photo of Reservation Golf Course right now is taken during the winter time. So the green's a neon green and then everything else is brown. It just doesn't look great. It's not a good look for the golf course, so I don't really want to show those pictures. Maybe I'll just use the yardage book. Yeah, so the first 2 holes, not only just a little bit of background, you know, Reservation Golf Club is an 1895 private member-owned hole-in-the-wall golf club. It's never going to be in the best layout conversation, but the conditions are great. And anybody that's been down there with me, it's one of those golf courses that it is so much fun to play with 4 good players because they're usually all in the hole and everybody always has a chance at birdie. And there's definitely some fireworks that go on in matches, you know, some fun presses late that turn into exciting change momentum swings in matches. So again, this first hole is a 290-yard par 4, and it's straight up a hill, and it plays in levels. There's a couple hills that as you get better and as you hit it further, it's what club do I hit? You know, because you don't want to hit it in trouble. And there's a way to miss on this hole that can really put you behind the 8 ball right off the tee right before you start, right? Is out of bounds. That's literally, if you stand on that first tee, put the peg in the ground, put your driver in your hand and take dead aim at the flag and miss that flag by 10 or 15 yards to the right, you're out of bounds. 10 or 15 yards to the left, it leaves you a tricky flip shot over the bunker with another bunker on the other side. So, as I started to develop as a golfer and kind of understanding that I can hit a wedge from 60 or 70 yards a lot closer more often than putting all this other stuff in play, it just made more sense. There's a sprinkle head about 3/4 of the way up the hill. It's probably about 10 or 15 yards left of where the flag would sit. That's 67 yards. And that was my goal. I was playing a par 3 to that sprinkle head every time I stepped on that first tee. Well, 4th tee or whatever you want to call it. But and if you've been there before, it's kind of a bowl, and what it does is the 67-yard marker is my end spot. You know, that's not where I'm aiming it. I aim it at the next tee, and what that does is if I hit the dreaded straight ball, it's going to hit the hill, funnel off the hill, and end up back probably in very similar position. If I fan one or cut one, it's going to be close and it's going to put out of bounds in play, but most of the time I'm not going to miss it bad enough to hit it OB. I'm going to end up over there in the rough and have a different angle at the flag and make the hole play a little bit more difficult, but I'm not out of the hole. Whereas if I try to take dead aim at the flag and I miss that same swing, I'm out there on 9 fairway and I'm out of bounds. So these are the things that golfers today aren't thinking of. Their first reaction is, ooh, 290. Let me pull a driver and let me go at the green. And then they get in there and they say, man, I hit it good today. Why did I shoot 75? Well, because you hit 3 balls out of bounds going at shit that you shouldn't go after, you know? So, like I said, I'm just trying to hit it at the second tee and just hit like a little punch cut out there with a 3-wood and hopefully have that little 67-yard pitch shot in. And the reason why is the green kind of folds from back to front. So, and everything runs left. And if you're just listening, I'm trying to paint a picture for you. But if you're watching at home, I'm going to try to, you know, put some pictures in here and show you what I'm talking about. But if the green's sitting at you straight on like this, you know, I'm trying to come in from a little bit over here on the left. The reason being is once you get over that hill, everything runs. So from the 67-yard sprinkle head, I can hit a wedge at the middle of the green. If I fan it a little bit right, it's going to hit that hill and run all the way onto the green. If it doesn't hit the hill and run all the way on the green, I'm going to have an easy up and down. So that's going to be my miss. You know, technically it's short straight on, but from where I'm hitting that shot, it's short right. No matter what, I can putt, I can hit a 6-iron, bump and run, I can chip, I can use a wedge, I can hit any shot that I want from that little area that I'm trying to hit it to, right? Most of the time from 67 yards, you're not going to miss it far enough left to have to worry about the bunker left. You know, you may hit it a little long, or if you hit one a little thin, it may end up in that bunker right, which is difficult. It's not where you're trying to miss, but at the end of the day, you can kind of manage bogey at the worst. But for the most part, I'm trying to one hop it short of the green and hop it up. You know, there were certain years where it got soft, and that's my frustration and my complaints came in when it was soft because it took away the safe play. You couldn't land it short and have it hop up. You had to hit the wedge all the way to the green, and it brought in all kinds of other issues that shouldn't be there for a hole that simple, right? So, you know, that is a perfect example of a short, old, scoreable par 4 that strategy comes into play, right? You know, if you take driver, you can make 12, but if you hit a good little 3-wood out there and put a wedge in your hand, you're going to have some opportunities to make birdie. And I say 3-wood because that's what I'm hitting now, but back when I was longer, it wasn't 3-wood, it was hybrid because 3-wood would get, once you get over that second hump and you start getting green high, now you start bringing all kinds of other misses into play. But what I want you guys to understand is when I'm standing on that tee box, you know, I don't see the out of bounds right, I don't see the out of bounds left. All I see is a par 3 that I'm playing with that tee shot to hit it at that sprinkle head. You know, aim small, miss small, right? And that's always where I'm trying to end up, but that's not where I'm starting it, and it's not where I'm looking to hit it. I'm hitting it at the second tee. I'm letting my natural cut take it there. So, so let's flip it around and come back the other way because this is the one that kind of plays more modern style golf, and it's why I chose these 2 holes to talk about. The next hole is a short par 5 that has same thing, out of bounds down the right side, but you have 2 fairways wide. So if you hit it there, you're an absolute fucking moron. There's a house behind the first tee that has a bright red roof, and I was always aiming at the very right edge of that red roof. And here's why. Some of the holes kind of, or some of the hills kind of roll and up and down, and if I hit it at that with a baby fade, if I hit it solid, I'm going to land on the downslope and it's going to take off. It's going to give me an extra 20 yards. And unfortunately for Resi, they haven't really kept up with the equipment. They haven't had the money to add trees or replace trees that have been taken down and the weather. And there's some spots out there where, you know, there's 4 holes off the bat that I can think of where 10 yards of carry gets you 40 yards because you don't hit into the hill, you hit on the back side of the hill and it takes off. So that, you know, you start talking about equipment and you start talking about technology, adding distance to guys, and it really changes the way the hole plays. And there's a couple things I think they could do to those holes. That might be a whole show for another day. How how would you change the 2 golf courses or the 3 golf courses that I play a lot that I talk about? And I was joking this morning. The first thing I would do if I hit the lottery tonight, the first thing I would do is I would go out and hire Core Crenshaw to do Resi, and I would go hire Gil Hance to go do New Bedford. That's what those 2 places need. Let's go back to old school, classic golf with the type of architects that understand what you have. I think a Core Crenshaw renovation at Resi would be awesome. Get rid of all the rough, make the bunkers sloppy on purpose, old school, fescue, and make it play like a true links side golf course. It's the only ocean side golf course that I've ever seen that doesn't have fescue. So that's one of the things that I would do. I would get rid of all the rough. I would, except for close to the greens, but I would add waste areas and make it play more old school, get rid of that modern style. And I think you're starting to see a lot of designers kind of agree, and you're starting to see less flat lies. That's one thing about modern golf compared to old school. And it goes back to the equipment. I can fit you for a 7-iron all day, and you can sit there and stripe it. But the second that I put you on a 5% slope with the ball hanging below your feet, does that fitting matter? Can you hit that shot? And that's what differentiates, the best players and the best ball strikers in the world and guys that shoot 90. So, but let's come back the other way. So it's a par 5, you're hitting driver right at that red roof. The wind comes off the left and down. And ideally, it's going to push it back to the middle, a little fade. There's a 189 sprinkle head in there that I want to be inside that. It's going to leave you somewhere with anywhere from 5 to 8 iron in, depending on where you end up. But again, the miss, right? I'm hitting it dead straight. If I hit the dreaded straight ball at that corner, it's going to get on the upslope down there on the left on the other fairway. And instead of having 165, 170, I'll have 185. Who cares, right? You can still hit it to a place where you can play from, but this green is a new green. If you look at the bunkers that are along the first tee, the old green used to be somewhere in there, and it kind of fit the mold of an old school flat push-up green with a couple bunkers and nothing special. But back in the 80s, they extended it and they made it play like a par 5, and they added a new green. Unfortunately, they didn't really pay attention to the styling and the way the golf course was originally set up, and they built a modern USGA spec green surrounded by bunkers, and it plays completely different than the rest of the golf course. And that's fine, because that's kind of what Resi is. It's a mismatch, hodgepodge, low budget golf course that does the best with what they can. And at the time, they were trying to lengthen the golf course and make it play like a par 5. So it's not a complaint, it's an observation. After about 20 years of struggling with moss and drainage and all those things that they had issues with on that green, eventually they tore it up, and they actually put the old Poe back from all of the practice greens because they just couldn't maintain it the way the rest of them were. But so when you hit your tee shot there, and now I'm standing there 185 and most golfers are thinking, let's go, right? I'm 185 in on a par 5. Let's hit it stiff and make eagle. Well, that's how you end up making bogey, So this is where we're going to talk about some strategy. Right now, I can take 6-iron, take dead aim, and if I miss, and you scramble from there. Or I can take one more, I hit so. Again, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. This is one of those shots that it's not like I have one place where I can say, okay, if I miss there, I have no issues, right? Because this bunker's short. If you hit hard and go over the back, if the pin's on the front right, you're in trouble. So this is modern style golf. You have to figure out your miss based on where the pin is. So if the pin's back left, like I said at Charles River, I'm taking dead aim at the flag. I'm hoping my little cut falls 15, 20 feet. And if I hit the dreaded straight ball, great. I had a good look at eagle. But my miss there with the flag over there is actually long. I don't want to be in those short bunkers. So like I said, instead of hitting 6-iron and taking dead aim, I'm going to hit like a 5-iron. I'm going to, play it a little forward in my stance, kind of lean back a little bit, try to shoot it up in the air with a cut. If it doesn't cut, great. I hit it close. If it does cut and it's too much and it hits and takes off, I can get up and down from that collection area, right? Same thing in the middle of the green, right? As we start to move over, there's a ridge that kind of falls down off to the front. And if the pin's down there and you're by it, you have no chance. So now that completely changes my thought process. Now I'm sitting in that same spot, 185 or 175 or whatever, and I'm looking at a flag that's right. Well, guess what? Now long is absolutely dead. Left is absolutely dead, and I want no part of it. So what I'm looking at is the ridge. I'm hitting a dead straight ball at the ridge. If it lands on the ridge, it'll funnel to the hole. If I hit my baby fade, now we're looking at a good shot. And if I miss, which my usual miss is kind of like a block short cut, it'll fall short into that bunker. Or if I hit it well enough to get it up over that bunker, and same thing from that area. Now I have a pretty easy up and down, easy chip. But, like I said, these are the things that golfers aren't thinking about anymore. And I think if the tour players would go back to playing equipment, golf ball that's spun, drivers that are a little less forgiving, different hanging lies. That's my one big thing. I know I was kind of in a dark place and was just ranting about certain places. TPC Boston, I probably gave them a little harder time than I really feel. It was more for effect, trying to make my point. I'm not a huge fan of the golf course. It's one of those places where if somebody said, hey, you want to go play TPC tomorrow? Absolutely, I'll play. But it falls in on the same thing with the rest of the TPC golf and any golf from like 65, 70 to like 1990s or early 2000s, right? It was built with big machines, houses align the property. They want you playing station to station, straight. And you end up, if you do that, you end up with flat lies, and that's not golf. That's what makes the old golf courses so special. They use the land and the property and the hills and the slopes. And I think we've gotten away from that a little bit and watching it on TV. And this weekend, I know I'm kind of on a little bit of a rant this week with the bifurcation and stuff, because Cam Young's equipment kind of showed that. You tuned in on Sunday and it was like watching paint dry, watching the Cadillac at Doral. A lot of flat lies to big greens. It's just kind of boring. And they're going to say, oh, the ratings are good, the ratings are high. Well, yeah, but who's watching and what are they watching for? You hear the comments about his personality and how boring he is. Scotty Scheffler, for example. Scotty Scheffler is boring as can be, but he scrapes it around and he's fun to watch. And when he's playing well and he's in contention, he's entertaining. Tiger, same thing. He would miss some shots, but he missed it in a spot where, guess what? He gets to try to make the next one. And people talk about this all the time. You talk about good players and bad players, and what's the difference? A good player misses a green and he's smiling. He says, good, I get to show off my short game now. A bad player misses a green and they're like, oh shit, what do I do? How do I figure this out? How do I not make we could go on and on. This is just simple full shot strategy, how to miss, what to aim at, what I look at, what I see. We're not even talking about once we get around the greens, walking up to it, looking at the golf ball. There's times where you're better off hitting a little bump and run with a 6-iron, and then there's times where you're better off looking at a wedge and playing it as if a bunker shot, right? You're not trying to make contact with the ball. You're just trying to kind of muffle your way out of it and let it on the green and tumble towards the hole. The players that play this style of golf are probably going to be in the mix. They're not going to make big numbers. They're going to keep themselves somewhere around the hunt. And then you're going to have the guys that are hitting it well, that play long and straight and far, that are going to make putts, that they're going to make birdies. And that's the way it is. I've talked about it multiple times. I never anticipated making the PGA Tour. When I was playing for a living, it was me trying to do the best I could to make a few cuts and kind of prove to myself that I could play with some of the best players in the world. But, my score target was always 2 under to 2 over. I wanted to be in that 4-shot window. If I shot 2 under every day, then you get to 8 under, and yeah, you may be top 10, top 15 and make a decent check, which I did a couple times. But for the most part, I'm scrambling to make cuts and I just want to make it to the next week. I wanted to learn. I wanted to be able to teach from experience. I played for a living. I lived in my car eating fucking tuna fish. You know what it's like, and I thought that would help me to do things like this. I didn't have a podcast in my mind, but I thought, some playing lessons with some guys. And we did, I had some stuff going last year. There's a couple golfers that if they call, I think this summer we're probably going to get out and we're going to work on their game. And I think I'm trying to stay on case, but I don't want to go on a rant about golf courses per se, because it's not about any one or two courses in particular. It's about the styles of courses and how to kind of establish your target lines and play. How do you shoot 2 under on a day where you're hitting it sideways? You play it back in your stance, hit a little low trap to the safe spot, get it up and down, and birdie the par fives. That's what I think we're losing. Analytics have taken over all sports, and unfortunately, at the big league level, you can still get away with it, but when you're an amateur and you're just trying to survive and just trying to play golf, it's doing the younger generation or people trying to learn golf a disservice. No, you're not good enough to hit 3-wood from 250. Hit hybrid to 200, hit the next one on the green, and make sure you don't make 10. Make 5. It's okay. But we're in a modern society of instant gratification, and we watch these guys on tour playing equipment that doesn't move. You saw Ludwig Oberg, I think it was at the Players, that hit something so far off the toe, but he still carried it 300 and he's just off the fairway. So they don't care. Me and you aren't good enough to do that. If we miss it off the toe like that, it's going 40 yards right. Those guys, their gear is so dialed in and their equipment and their game is so dialed in that it's not just see shot, shoot target, hit shot. There has to be some thought process to it. So, I wanted to talk about those two holes and kind of the different shots that you can hit and the different ways that you can see things, the way I see things, right? I see things from the green back. Where do I want to miss so that way I can get up and down? Okay. Now, where do I want to hit it so way that gives me the best angle at that spot? That's what's being lost today. Guys just get up and try to whack driver as hard as they can, and you get public golf and even a lot of private clubs now, you start to get those soft conditions and you can get away with it. And then all of a sudden, I had a buddy and he went to play Wannamoisett last year while they were doing maintenance on the golf course. And I'm like, how'd you play? And he goes, it was all right. It was eye opening. He goes, I got on the first hole. I was just off the green on the right side and I chipped it off the green, because the greens are so firm. And I'm not saying you need US Open conditions all the time, but like Resi, for example, when it's rolling 10 and a half and the greens are firm, it can compete. I give any 5 handicapper and above 10 chances and $100. And if you break par, I'll give you the $100, right? Everybody sees, it's 5,500. It's nothing. I'm going to go eat that place up and I'm going to shoot under par. Well, the conditions tell you, not so fast. When the game is being played up in the air and straight and boring, those conditions don't even register to people. They don't even, it's, I just hit a bad shot. I should have ended up in the middle. No, you're not good enough to hit it in the middle. Hit a fade. Hit it down the left side and fade it. If you end up in the middle, great. If it goes dead straight, the dreaded straight ball. Why do we call it the dreaded straight ball? Because it's so hard to hit that we're never going to plan for it. Well, that's what we've gotten to now. And that's what happens when you get fit and taught and everything is in a box on a mat with a perfect lie. We don't play golf indoors. It's golf. It's not golf shot. And I don't know. I just kind of ranted a little bit, hopefully this will help some people. And if it is and you guys react, a couple of you reached out after the last episode. I appreciate the support. I appreciate you guys liking what I'm talking about. And if you have any ideas, if you say, hey, I'm curious what your opinion is on this, what's your opinion on that? I have no problem giving you an honest opinion. Unfortunately, when I was in a dark place, I made it personal and that was my fault. But usually I'm pretty good at when I have something to say about golf, it's golf. It's not personal. It's a 30-year career. So if you ask me a question and I give you an answer, if you're offended by that answer, that's a you problem, not a me problem, because I take personal out of it. You ask me X, I answer with Y. There's no, okay, so-and-so's got sensitive skin. He asked me this. I have to be careful about the way I answer that. No, yeah, I 100% hand up. I went on a rant about Caddyshack and Bob the Builder, and it turned into more entertainment for me, coming up with the nicknames. I don't do nicknames. I'm talking about New Bedford. I want to talk about New Bedford. Here it is, black and white. You are this golf course. Unfortunately, I don't think there'll ever be that golf course again. The most recent renovation, it just doesn't fit the property. They've tried to modernize it, whereas everybody else is going to get old school video and pictures and trying to restore. They didn't. They modernized, and it you can say what you will, call me a hater, or say I'm being a personal attack, but it's not. It's the best way to describe it is, a guy driving a Mercedes, he gets hit and he can't afford to take it to the good Mercedes dealer to fix. You got a black Mercedes and all of a sudden you have a red quarter panel and it just doesn't fit. You're driving around a nice brand new Mercedes and you bend a rim and you can't afford to replace the rim and you put the donut on. Well, that's what I see when I see up there. It just, the new bunkers aren't old at all. There's no depth to them. And I've got into it on the last episode, whereas they didn't fix the issues from the 2006-ish renovation. You guys look at us and you say, John, why are you ranting and raving about this? Why are you even talking about it? Why do you care? Well, because I do. Why do you care about Pokemon? Why do you care about fucking Barbie? It's what I care about. It's what I like. I don't like video games. I don't like movies. I don't like sitting still doing nothing. For me, it's golf. And when I like a property, I will pay attention to detail of every little detail of that property, right? I could tell you every nook and cranny about Old Sandwich. I caddied out there. I've played there so many times. I love the property. I love the golf course. Every time I played it, I'd look for something else. Being a bad golfer, that helps with that too. I get to see some spots that I've never seen. Didn't know that was over here. You start hitting it sideways and you kind of see some interesting things, but it also kind of, put some notes in your yardage book and helps you move forward, helps you put together a plan. The last thing I'm going to say about that is you saw those guys yesterday played Shinnecock or a couple of days ago, and Kiz was on Foreplay Podcast talking about, you guys just go to the range, you hit 3 balls and you're ready to go to the first tee. You guys don't even get loose. And that's become more common than actually guys planning the day around golf. Like, let's show up, let's hit balls for a half hour or so. Let's go play some golf, then sit down and have a beer and chat. No, I don't want to giggle and chat and have a good time on the golf course. In between shots, a little bit here and there, but for the most part, I'm playing golf. I want to grind. I want to shoot the best number I can. And we'll giggle about that shank that you hit on 12 while we're sipping a beer after the round, So, all right, guys, a little bit of a rant. I don't know if I kind of did what I wanted, didn't do what I wanted, but it got me to sit down and focus and do some stuff. And we'll try to put some video in here and we'll try to play producer and see if we can put the best episode I can up. But until next time, I hope you guys are hitting it well and hope your golf courses are starting to come in, starting to look like mid-season. And we're going to try. I've been taking as many drugs as I possibly can to potentially get out there and play around the golf this year. But who knows? If I get to play, great. We'll have some more topics. If not, we'll just be here ranting. Let's go.